Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the moves that Boris Johnson is now making in order to frantically scrub his fingerprints from our woeful pandemic response when the inevitable inquiry comes. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, throughout the pandemic in the UK, Boris Johnson has tried to suggest that his response has been marvellous. And where it wasn't actually as great as he'd hoped, then at least he did better than anyone else would have. At the start of the emergency, he was drawing international comparisons on a daily basis because, of course, we were behind the curve. Once those international comparisons weren't reflecting well on us, he began insisting that international comparisons aren't at all valid. We should not be using these things. He insisted that he took the right action at the right time. That was his statement and the statement of his ministers. The right action at the right time. This included his decision to lock down last March, 2 weeks after he was advised to. Now he's trying to change that as well. In an article in the right-wing Telegraph, the report suggests that Johnson now accepts that he locked down too late, but that this was because he was let down by his scientific advisors. Would these be the same scientific advisors who are on record as saying the lockdown should have been 2 weeks earlier? But what Johnson is trying to do here, of course, is get out of the blame when the inquiry comes. Of course, we should have already had an inquiry by now. The government blocked all such moves, saying that we shouldn't have an inquiry on the pandemic in the middle of the pandemic emergency. On the contrary, the middle of the emergency is the best time to have the inquiry because then you can learn lessons that mean the second half goes a lot better than the first. The real reason is that Johnson knows his response will not stand up to any sort of scrutiny. It's not just that there were mistakes made, it's that they were deliberately made. It will be a highly damaging inquiry for him. Naturally, I do not expect a public inquiry to take place, even though it should, not while the Conservatives remain in charge at any rate. To do so would be to surely invite serious political damage to them. It will be a government-led inquiry, and they'll be implementing quite rigid guidelines for those who conduct it. But they will not be able to completely fabricate it. Compare the inquiry, for example, into the bullying allegations against Home Secretary Priti Patel. That was done internally. The reason it was done internally was to basically have her exonerated. Thing is, though, when you're as guilty as that, you can't really avoid those findings. But being an internal inquiry, all the Prime Minister had to do was say that he didn't agree with the findings, and officially that was that. A public inquiry would have been quite different. But the point is that no matter how much they try and fudge it, any inquiry will not be able to claim that our response was even acceptable, let alone good. Blame will be apportioned for the catastrophic failures, and Johnson would very much like to avoid them, just as he seeks to avoid all responsibility for his actions. The thing is, that should be impossible for Johnson. Should be absolutely impossible for him to get out of this, because we know he was advised to lock down earlier than he did. Then we had the second lockdown. It is also established and documented that Johnson's scientific advisors said that we needed to lock down on September the 21st. He eventually locked down a full 6 weeks later, I think it was, resulting in, of course, a huge death toll. And even then, we still came out of it earlier than we should have done. He also delayed action over Christmas, and even then it was still not entirely in line with the published scientific advice. In fact, Johnson's response throughout this has been characterised by two distinct features. One, he acts much later than he is advised to. It's not just that he did it in that first instance. Every single time he acts much later than he is advised to. The second feature is that when he does act, he waters down the action compared to the advice. And the advice isn't a matter of hearsay. Although the sage minutes are diluted a little by the political members of the panel who feed into it, who should have not been contributing at all, of course, most famously Dominic Cummings for much of last year, those minutes still exist. And even the bits we don't get to see, well, an inquiry might. So Boris Johnson is apparently being quoted, albeit off the record, as saying that he would have acted harder, earlier, faster. But this has no credibility to it at all when he continually refused to learn the lesson. Had he learned the lesson, had it just been a cock-up on the first lockdown, absolutely he'd get this to stick. You know, he might have gotten away with it if he'd just improved his behaviour when the whole hideous cycle began again, and then it will happen again. And then what happens this autumn? Now, I'm not suggesting that the third wave after summer will be as bad as the second that we're hopefully coming towards the end of now. But it will be there and it will require action. See, too many people think that the vaccination programme is it, that this will finally beat it. Once we're all vaccinated, we're sorted. But you won't find any actual experts saying that. The world over, they are making it clear that we will get a third wave. Of course, the vaccinations will help. The problem with the vaccinations, of course, is one, it doesn't give you 100% protection. It gives you a lot of protection. It doesn't give you 100%. The other problem is that there's a lot of people who are not accepting the vaccinations. We're not getting enough of the population vaccinated to actually achieve effective herd immunity. And then, of course, you know, the whole hideous cycle still begins again due to two other things. First of all, our very leaky borders. We're still letting people come and go as they please into and out of the country. And also new variants could have greater protection against the vaccinations. We're going to need to develop more vaccines, and that's fine, and I expect that to happen, but they still need to be rolled out, you know. And so we are going to get a third wave in autumn. Yes, the government will spend summer denying it, just like they did last year. Just like last year, people will believe it. Last year, they believed it because, oh, it's gone down. This year, they won't be able to say that because we'll say, yeah, but look what happened in autumn. But they'll say, the vaccine. But it will come, and when it does, the Prime Minister will be advised to take action again, as he always has been. And just as before, he will refuse. He may eventually be forced to, only at the point where the NHS is actually about to melt again. So how does he think he's going to be able to rewrite history and said, oh yeah, of course I've had my time again. I'd have totally acted more quickly if 3 lockdowns later, he's still acting too slowly. And the documented advice from his advisors that he is trying to blame will show this. Because in fact, ever since ministers tried blaming scientific advisors last summer, those advisors have become a little bit more robust in ensuring that the public are aware of their advice. You know, at the start of it, it was actually very difficult to know what the scientific advice was because we weren't able to see the minutes. They were delaying publication of those, and they certainly weren't talking publicly. But recently, the Chief Medical Officer was saying that he expects cases to surge over the next few months as we remove restrictions, which of course they will, we know that. But this is not the sort of thing that he would have said publicly when he didn't have to a year ago. You know, they tended to be a bit more circumspect. But they're obviously deciding now that they're not interested in being the fall guys for Johnson's willful incompetence either. Johnson's ace will, of course, you would imagine, be the media. You'd think that they will report it in a way that is kindest to the Conservatives. Not necessarily out of love for Johnson himself, but out of a desire not to damage the party for the next general election. By delaying the inquiry, all Johnson is really doing is ensuring that the findings will come out closer to the general election than might otherwise have been the case. Although it could well be that the thinking is that if you delay it for long enough, he can suppress publication of the findings until after the general election. Let's say they decide to order the inquiry in 2022, but make it a very wide-ranging inquiry, so it can't possibly report back until the end of 2023. Then he'll say, well, we need to check it for publication, make sure it's not giving away any national secrets. And then he sits on it until after the general election. That's a possibility, like he did with the Russia report before the last one. But the thing is, if you read this report in the Telegraph, a paper that Johnson worked for on a very lucrative contract before he became Prime Minister, and it's clear even here that Johnson delayed against the advice. So it doesn't seem at all clear that the Tory media will work hard to cover his blushes too much, because this paper certainly isn't. The Sun and the Express may be, but perhaps not others. Of course, if Johnson has already gone or is in the process of being eased out by the time an inquiry is ready to report, it might actually be in their interest to dump all the blame on Johnson to clear all the blame from whoever is leading the party at the time, you know, because he won't be the one leading at the next election. But either way, it doesn't really seem possible for Johnson to get away with this when even a tightly controlled inquiry gets underway. If he couldn't cover up Patel's bullying, he surely can't cover up his colossal failures over the coronavirus pandemic. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.